we start? We're already running 5 minutes late. We're running 5 minutes late. Yeah, okay. When do you want me to start? 5 minutes? Immediately? Yeah, that's when we get to the 8:00 fixed. We'll start, yeah.
कौन से है सर? ये कॉपी कर ठीक है
Okay. All set?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello, good morning. We will now start the next session. Gyanesh Kudaisya is from the National University of Singapore, and he will talk about revisiting the Bihar-West Bengal merger plan, 1956. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm very grateful to Dr. Shebal Gupta.
Can he be heard at the back?
Can you
hear
me at the
him?
back?
Okay, good. Go ahead.
Is it too loud? Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm very grateful to Dr. Shebal Gupta for inviting me to this conference. This has been a very wonderful experience. This is my first visit to Patna. So I should begin by saying that I'm not, my work is not really focused on Bihar, but what I'm presenting today is part of my larger interest, which is really on India in the 1950s in general, and especially on the politics of states reorganization and linguistic regions. So this is part of that larger interest, and I have some material which relates to Bihar and Bengal, which I wanted to share with you. So my remarks and my observations are really preliminary. I'm here to learn from all of you rather than... the aims of what I'm hoping to do is to revisit the almost now forgotten episode of a plan for merger of Bihar and Bengal, which was mooted in 1956 by the two chief ministers, Shri Krishna Sinha and Dr. Bidhan Chandra Roy. So I want to tell you something about the plan, revisit that episode, also initiate a discussion about how the region was envisioned in the 1950s. I also want to situate Bihar in the pan-Indian context of states reorganization, which was then unfolding. And in doing so, I hope that I can draw upon some insights from the archival material. I can share some insights from the archival material about the idea of Bihar and its political and developmental trajectories from those times, which may have a resonance in our times. So this is roughly the plan. Before I come to the story, I just want to reference a couple of concepts, some literature. So I've been looking at how regions have been studied in the Indian context or the South Asian context. And some of the ideas which I have found useful come from Bernard Cohen, the historian among the anthropologists. And an essay of his, a not very well-known essay, but an important essay called Regions, Objective and Subjective. So he basically talked about how regions are, there is not one particular notion of region. He talks about multiple types of regions and how there can be different types of regions constructed around the idea of nature, around language, and he gives certain examples. So Bengal, the centrality of the worship of the goddess, which animates the idea of Bengal as a region. Looking at Bundelkhand, the prominent role of Bundela Rajputs in framing that region. Some of those insights are useful. But more recently, looking at more recent literature, I found the work of the Scandinavian geographer Ansi Pasi quite useful. Pasi says that regions are constructed over time. They attain their territorial shape through a historical process. And this historical process is contested, deeply contested. It is a process which is really contingent upon circumstances. And in this process, elites play a very important role. And there could be multiple imaginings of the region, drawing upon language, culture, food, natural resources, ethnicity, and so on. I also find the work of the Thai historian Thongchai Vinichakul, his notion of geobody in this important work which he wrote called Siam Mapped. So he talks about geobody in terms of, mainly in the context of the nation, but I think it can also be applied in relation to region. So the attributes of that would be territory, the image of that territory which must be recognizable to its inhabitants through maps and images, and how these maps and images become a source of pride, loyalty, love, passion, bias, hatred, reason and unreason. So I think these are, I think this notion of geobody could be quite useful when we think about regions in our context. So looking at Bihar's geobody, one of the things which is so striking about Bihar is the alterations and reconfigurations which have taken place in the last 100 years. So this is a listing of, this is of course familiar to everyone here. The first partition of Bengal, in which Bengal and Bihar formed one province, current Bengal, West Bengal and Bihar formed one province, and East Bengal and Assam became another province. The 1911 Delhi Darbar, the announcement of the creation of Bihar and Orissa as a separate province. The movement of capital away from Calcutta to Delhi, which left a deep sort of psychological impact upon Bengalis, upon the Bengali Bhadralok. In 1937, the separation of Orissa from Bihar. The princely states of Seraikela and Kharswan remain part of Singhbhum district, although there are a lot of Oriya speakers in that. Then the 1953-55 States Reorganization Commission story. So this is really what I'm hoping to share with you, the 50s story. And in that, the S.K. Sinha, B.C. Roy merger plan comes. And then the outcome is really the Bihar and Bengal Transfer of Territories Act, in which the boundaries between Bihar and Bengal are adjusted. So that's really the concrete part of what I'm going to discuss. And of course, there is the 2000, the creation of Jharkhand. What is so striking about all this is that Bihar has had this, perhaps the only region in India or in South Asia, which has had so much of sharing. If you look at Bihar and Orissa have been part of one entity. Bihar and Bengal have, of course, had been historically part of one entity. Bihar and Jharkhand. And then I don't know much about Bihar and Nepal. So there is a kind of a sharing of territory and a kind of an embeddedness of territory. If you look at all the four neighbors of Bihar historically. So this really makes one pose the question, where does Bihar begin and where does it end, in a sense. And I think no other state can claim this kind of sharing. Okay, now let me come to the context. India in the 1950s, often referred to as the most dangerous decades. This cover from the Time, which really conveys that sense about territory, the contestation over territory, the linguistic contentions which erupted in the mid-1950s, and the prophecies of collapse and breakup, how different different regions, how different parts of India wanted to, wanted autonomy, some of them wanted to secede, and how this posed the great challenge to the newly established republic of survival, of staying united. So this work by Selig Harrison, which is rather well known, so I won't go into details of that, but just to give you the context. Now this sort of conveys some of those sentiments, some of those emotions. So I think I don't want to rehearse the sort of narrative of political history, which is rather well known, which is really about the creation of Andhra Pradesh, how this fast by this Gandhian activist, Potti Sriramulu, led to the demand for Andhra being accepted by Nehru, how Nehru, who was very resistant to the idea of creating linguistic states in the 1950s, had to rise in parliament when Potti Sriramulu died, and then agree to the creation of an Andhra state, of a Telugu-speaking state. And then, of course, this opened up the Pandora's box. So different regions came up with demand. So this really conveys, if you are familiar with the characters of the 1950s, so this is B.C. Roy, this is Govind Vallabh Pant, this is Pratap Singh, this is Master Tara Singh, and of course Nehru running away. Huh? So, and this is C. Rajagopalachari. And then more of this sentiment. So this is really Nehru thought that he would appease the Telugus, but he did not really expect that other demands will come up in such a persistent manner. So if you read here, I don't know if you can read, you can see far, this says Telugu here, and this says Tamil, Kannada, Punjabi, and so on. So this really led Nehru. Nehru soon realized that he can't deal with all this. What he needs to do is to really de-accelerate the process, and this can be done by, the usual modus operandi which governments resort to, is to set up a commission which will help find a consistent criteria, set up a process through which these aspirations, these demands can be dealt with, and people don't start going on hunger strikes, and certainly the government having to react to contingencies like that. So he set up this commission, and he gathered a stellar cast of characters to be part of this. The picture that you see in the center is of Justice Sir Syed Fazil Ali, a very prominent Bihari, who was a judge of the Patna High Court between 1928 to 1947, then went on to become a judge of the Supreme Court. A person who was widely respected for his impartiality, for his judicial acumen. The two other people that you see is Hridaynath Kunjuru to the left, a non-partisan figure, a liberal, not connected to any particular region, although he came from UP, but he was seen to be a very non-partisan, highly respected figure. And Sardar K.M. Panikkar, historian and journalist, then serving as ambassador to France, also thinking about balance, in terms of Muslim, South Indian, and so on, and somebody who is not connected to any of the demands for creation of new states. Now let's look at the regional context. So the regional context is really the two prominent regional satraps, Dr. Bidhan Chandra Roy and Shri Krishna Sinha, Bidhan Babu and Shri Babu. And you can see that, they are very sort of, you can see them as parallel figures, both in terms of their age, their political career, their stature, the fact that both of them served as chief ministers of Bihar and Bengal respectively. So Shri Bidhan Chandra Roy became chief minister in 1947, just after the Congress was plunged into a crisis, and the different factions, the East Bengal faction and the West Bengal faction, could not work together, and he emerged as a consensus figure. So he was actually born in Patna, and he spent the first 13, 14 years of his life in Patna. So he had a close affinity with Bihar. He had two parallel careers, as people will know, one in medicine and other in politics, and the two often converged. So he was a FRCSA, president of the Indian Medical Council, personal physician to Nehru, Gandhi, Rajendra Prasad, and a host of Congress leaders. When he became Chief Minister of Bihar, he had to deal with a regional economy shattered by partition and the huge influx of refugees who came into Bengal. And of course, he's credited with his strong leadership. He's associated with the Durgapur steel plant, the Chittaranjan locomotive works, the Kalyani township, and so on. So he had, this is a quotation, that the best way, this is his, quoting him, the best way to treat any illness, physical or political, is with studied diagnosis, thorough knowledge of available remedies, decisive treatment, and a sympathetic touch. Then you have the very comparable figure of Shri Krishna Sinha, Chief Minister for 14 years and 9 months, perhaps the longest serving Chief Minister until the record was broken by Jyoti Basu. He had a long career in the Congress, spent 8 years in prison. A very strong leader, a charismatic orator, with deep literary and cultural interests. And then, like B.C. Roy, associated with Bokaro steel plant, Rourkela, heavy engineering, the Sindri fertilizers, the Damodar Valley projects. Now, what is so comparable about them is that they are both regional satraps. And one of the qualities of being a regional satrap is that you are, of course, you endorse the center, you endorse the leadership of Nehru, his policies, but you are very protective of your own autonomy. You are a strong leader in your own turf, you control your own turf. So I think this is where, these are the two important persons in our story. Now, let me focus on the States Reorganization Commission and the demands which were placed by Bihar before the commission. So there were 4 issues there. One was really a very well argued, a very well presented case for the formation of Jharkhand state in South Bihar. Now this is something which I'm not going into for the simple reason that there are many people in this room who know a lot about the Jharkhand movement. And lately there has been some work, for example, by Louis Tillon on the creation of 3 new states of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Uttarakhand. So this is not a story I'm covering. Then there were Odisha's claims over Bihar for the restoration of Saraikela and Kharsavan in Singhbhum district. These were former princely states. Then the huge border adjustments which were proposed by West Bengal. And then the counter claims by Bihar over Darjeeling, over West Bengal territory. Darjeeling, Jalpaiguri, Malda, West Dinajpur from West Bengal, from Sundargarh, Keonjhar, and Mayurbhanj from Odisha. So these were the 4 issues which the commission dealt with. Now let's consider the claims of West Bengal. So the West Bengal demanded 15,830 square miles of land from Bihar. No, in all, it demanded 13,830 square miles of land, which is really half of the size of West Bengal itself. So it's a huge, it's a very, very substantial demand which is being made. And from Bihar, it wanted 11,800 square miles located in Manbhum, Purnia, Santal Pargana, and Singhbhum districts. From Assam, West Bengal wanted 3,800 square miles in Golpara district. So this is really, if this had happened, this would have increased West Bengal's land mass very, very considerably. Now, we have to think about this. We have to think of why this demand is being made, because this is really the post-partition context, So this really made West Bengal the smallest of the Part A states, the smallest province of the provinces in post-independence India. And this, the huge problems, this whole sense of being truncated, the huge, the perception of what West Bengal has become in terms of the shattering of the economy, the influx of, refugees and all that. So, and then of course compare it to Greater Bengal. So this map which shows the footprint of Bengal as it existed in the past, which covered the whole of east and west, but also extending over Bihar, Jharkhand and Orissa, with substantial Bengali-speaking population in the outlying areas. So what was, 5 minutes? Okay. What was West Bengal's rationale? So the state has steadily lost territory since 1905. That territorial adjustment of borders has become a pressing issue. The huge influx of 3.5 million refugees who had come into Bengal. The further, I think the most substantial argument was that two parts of Bengal, the northern districts and the main Bengal, were not connected anymore. So Bengal itself was not a compact region. It was divided by partition, and the northern districts not being contiguous to Bengal. The control over river, the presence of Bengali communities in the border areas. So these are the kind of reactions. So this is B.C. Roy, G.V. Pant, who was then the Home Minister, and Shri Krishna Sinha. More of that. And there is a lot of popular momentum which is building up in Bengal right after 1947 that something has to be done for Bengal. Bengal needs compensation. What form will this take? Will it be central help or will it be territory? Something has to be done. So there is this very popular sort of feeling on the ground. So this is a map which shows the area claimed by Bengal. So this is a very substantial part of area claimed by Bengal. So if this demand by Bengal had been conceded, Bihar would have lost something like 35% of its territory. And then, this is not very clear perhaps, but this shows towards the lower part of the map, perhaps you can see the area which was claimed by Orissa. So this is a very serious situation which Bihar faces of demands being made upon its territory. And then of course Bihar's counter-claim before the States Reorganization Commission. So Bihar made the claim that it should have Darjeeling, Jalpaiguri, Malda, West Dinajpur, because most of the people who live in those areas are not really Bengali. Most of them are labor from Bihar, they are Hindi speakers, and so on. And then it makes these claims over Orissa. Of course, Bihar wants to retain Saraikela and Khaswan and Singhbhum. It refutes the demand for a separation of Jharkhand and South Bihar. And then it challenges the basis for border adjustments proposed by Bengal. So this is some of the data from some of the material which was presented by Bihar, that Bihar has serious food deficit which is growing. The dependence on land and agriculture is highest, among the highest in Bihar, and so on. And then the comparison with Bengal, how Bengal and Bihar have different kind of resources, how the per capita income of Bengal is much more than that of Bihar. So in January 1956, the center decided to give its decision on the State Reorganization Commission recommendations. And then it accepted that there should be some boundary adjustment which would take place. So I will come to that, but it basically led to a lot of resentment in both Bihar and Bengal, particularly in the border areas. And S.K. Sinha asked, mindful of this deep resentment within Bihar, S.K. Sinha asked for permission to resign as the chief minister. In Bengal, there was a general strike which was called, which was sponsored by the left. In January, 23rd January, the Congress made a call to the nation, a resolution which said that people and different regions should not really stick to the linguistic principle. They should think about not themselves, but also think about the unity of India. So maybe a different approach is needed for looking at the whole problem. On 23rd January 1956, B.C. Roy and Shri Krishna come with the extraordinary proposal for the merger of their two states. So this is, these are, this is the joint statement which they gave, that we feel that in the larger national interest as well in the interest of our two states, however, our interests are allied and there has to be mutual cooperation. Basically, they are responding to this, placing the unity of the nation, and thinking about ways in which states can work together. And this is not just them, this is really also happening in Bombay, because Bombay, the Marathi and the Gujarati speakers are those leaders are being forced to think about a united Bombay. So this is what really happens when the plan is announced, the merger plan is announced. So this is a reaction on the same day by Jawaharlal Nehru, that this is a great lead which Bengal and Bihar have provided, and I hope that other states will follow. Now, then on 31st January, this proposal is spelled out. So the new state will be called the United States of West Bengal and Bihar. The culture and language of each state will be protected. Patna and Calcutta High Courts will continue. The Chief Minister, there will be one common Chief Minister and one Deputy Chief Minister from the other region. The Chief Minister will be chosen alternatively. The existing land and tenancy systems will continue. Calcutta will continue as a principal capital and Patna will be the second capital. So just think about this entity. If this had come about, what would have happened? Sir, I would like you to look at some of the cartoons. Lord Desai, sir, I would like you to look at some of the cartoons.
I give you 4 minutes. I think you take 10.
Most grateful, sir. Not for me, for the cartoons. Okay, yeah. So just think about the population. It says, outlining the proposal for United States of Bengal and Bihar, Dr. B.C. Roy says, in many ways, each state will constitute its own life subject to a common approach to major problems. But it says, your love conquers all. Your children and my children will play with our children. So that's what it says at the top. And you just consider this population of 65 million, perhaps the largest, the most populous state, overtaking Uttar Pradesh. Area of 104,000 square miles. Now this is where the punch comes, 89 MPs in Lok Sabha. So more important than any other state that you can imagine. And I think this is where, Bihar having 55 MPs and West Bengal having 35 MPs. This is where you might find the astuteness of Shri Krishna Sinha. Because this idea that, we will be dominated by Bengal, but, there is a demographic here, a calculation which is involved. So initial reactions in West Bengal. On 18 February, West Bengal Congress approved the merger plan, subject to parity of representation for two regions in the upper house. Each region should have the unilateral right to secede, and then conditions and safeguards must have statutory sanction. So in exit clause, a way out. On 25th February 1956, Bihar Assembly approved a merger proposal by 157 to 25 votes. So this really shows the sort of dominance of Shri Krishna Sinha at that time, his leadership, that, so many members of the Assembly supported. And within the opposition call for holding a plebiscite in the Assembly is rejected. So this is my favorite cartoon. So this is really, just after the Assembly passed this resolution. So the two getting ready for the marriage, and then you can see the bride and the groom and so on. So there is much greater enthusiasm in Bihar, and there is a little skepticism in Bengal. And this skepticism then emerges full blown. On the 31st January, the opposition staged a walkout in the assembly. Then there is mobilization by students. The local elections, the Congress loses and the left wing gains support. There is a hartal, there is a kind of a morcha, and the left really organizes itself. Then there is an anti-merger committee convened by this person, not very well-known activist called Mohit Moitra. And then the left really throws its weight behind this, and then Jyoti Basu really, who says that this will become a cockpit for rivalries, the new plan. And then all the things about Shonar Bangla, the Bengali nationalism, how Bengal will lose its identity, how the East Bengali refugees who were converging in large numbers in Calcutta, who now provided the sort of base for the left parties, how they must be settled within Bengal, how they cannot be dispersed. So this argument against dispersal, and how the refugees really became the vanguard, in a sense, which propelled the left front to power later on. And this, you can see an early sign of this. What really then happens is the by-election to the Calcutta Northwest Lok Sabha seat, which takes place in 1956 in these months. And this by-election really becomes the kind of a referendum. It sort of becomes, a challenge which is thrown to B.C. Roy, that if you want the merger, you try and win the by-election. And then the Congress party puts up Ashok Sen, who later had a distinguished career as a law minister. And Ashok Sen actually loses the election. And when this happens, sorry? Sir, 5 minutes will be wonderful. Okay, I'll try to summarize soon. So what really then happens is a climb down. I mean, B.C. Roy sees the writing on the wall, and then there is a climb down. And then from merger to union. So this is a new proposal that West Bengal and Bihar will retain their separate identity, but will have a common chief minister. State assemblies will retain their identity, but will meet in joint sessions, and so on. So then, you see this move away, the contentions and the nervousness which comes in this whole plan. And then the denouement really comes when the by-election results are announced, and then unilaterally B.C. Roy announces the withdrawal of the merger plan to bow to the opinion of the public. So reflecting back upon this story, what can one say? What can one say? I think I would say that the fluidity of the region, of the whole idea of the region, its multiple constructions, the contestations that around it, these come through this episode, and of course the larger sort of claims and counterclaims made before the States Reorganization Commission. The other is this whole dynamic of the relationship between the nation and the region. So what, can these converge? Can they be, should the nation have primacy and the region its interests must be subordinate? So these are really ideas which are still being tested, which are being worked out. And in a sense, the federal project is being crafted in these years. It still has an uncertain trajectory in the 1950s. It's not something which was just written into the Constitution in 1950, and that was the end of the story. It's really the journey that you see in these years. The strength of mass politics, you can see the power of democracy at work. B.C. Roy understood. He was a very strong, powerful leader, but he understood that if the people do not lend their support, this idea is not going to fly, and he, withdrew it. Then the continuities in the discourse about development. If you look at the details, which I didn't have time to share with you, about irrigation, about industry, about agriculture, the complementarities between the two regions, there seems to be a great continuity in the discourse about development. And then the idea of Bihar in the 1950s. So to what extent those ideas which were articulated in the 1950s have a resonance in our times. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Gentleman back there. Yeah, then, yeah, first back there. Yeah, you'll have it, but has a man got a mic there? Okay, Wendy, you ask first.
I have two quick questions. One is, not only was there border disputes or this conversation with Bengal, but also border disputes with UP, and that helped define Bihar as well, in fact, ongoing. The second question is, I'm just curious why Bihar is depicted as a woman, or why Shri Babu is wearing a sari.
B.C. Roy was taller than S.K. Sinha, that's why. Gentleman there, at the back.
Good paper. I just wanted to make a small comment. You referred to some watershed years. I think you should have taken 1905 as a watershed year also, because that was the year when the Congress decided to reorganize its units on the linguistic principle. Then 1920 Nagpur session, when the Congress passed the resolution about the recrafting the provinces on the basis of language. Then 1928 Motilal Nehru report also would be important. And then the DAR committee and the JVP committee. Now my question is that from your presentation, it looked like that there was not much contestation against the idea of United States of West Bengal and Bihar. So what is this about Bihari identity? Because I have seen my father also, my parents' generation, that they never thought themselves about being Bihari. They always said we are national, Indian. My father was a doctor, always signed in Hindi. So it was basically like belonging to India, not having a kind of distinct regional identity. How do you explain this? This is one question which I wanted to ask. And there is another question also, because you are a historian. When the JVP committee and the DAR committee had their deliberations, did they refer to the concrete cases, or they were just battling with this idea whether to go for reorganization or not? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was a third question, so yeah, gentleman here.
Well, it's not my subject. I'm Gyanesh Kudaisya. It's not my subject, but then I have very carefully read the newspapers of those times. And all the newspapers even carried editorials, because a similar movement was going on in Maharashtra and Gujarat, and then the Bombay state for separation into Gujarat and Maharashtra. And this merger was a ploy to intercept that there is no demand raised from there. Will you please clarify that? Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat?
He's saying that the merger of Bengal and Bihar was supposed to include merger of Maharashtra and Gujarat. Maharashtra and Gujarat were already united, they were being split. The question was where Bombay will go. I lived through it, I marched for it.
So to prevent that,
Yeah, I mean, it is a hopeless hope, but that's why Nehru manipulated it. Yeah.
I suspect that first I wanted to ask this question: who mooted the idea of the merger? Sri Krishna Sinha or B.C. Roy? Number one. Number 2 point, that I suspect that because of the growing presence of the communist movement in West Bengal, B.C. Roy wanted this merger because he thought that he will sort it by linking Bihar, then the communists are marginalized. And it is also very interesting that while communists in Maharashtra spearheaded, or even in Andhra Pradesh, spearheaded the reorganization movement, in Bengal they were against the merger. So I just wanted to...
Okay, up to you now.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Singh's question. I think Lord Desai has already answered why Shri Babu was dressed as a woman. I think it's just the fancy of the cartoonists. They want to, how they view somebody. If he had been shown as a man, it would have made Bihar look much more aggressive, perhaps. I don't know what is being conveyed by that. But it's a very interesting way of presentation. The border dispute with UP, that's what you said. In the material, I did not really find any reference to the border dispute with UP. At least this was not put forward by the UP government or by the Bihar government. I have done some work on the UP in this context earlier, some years ago, but I don't recall any significant. If you have any information, I'll be grateful. Yeah. Partition of UP, that's a different story. It had proposed K.M. Panikar wrote a note of dissent on that. So that's a different story. But there is no issue between Bihar and UP as far as I can. There is? Okay, I would ask you for more information. Yeah. Professor Ashutosh Kumar, I'm glad you raised all those timelines about 1905, 1920, 1928, about the Congress's commitment to linguistic states. But the post-47 story is rather different. It's really about, we believe in linguistic states, it's a good idea, but the republic must consolidate. If these tendencies of different states being carved out just so soon after independence, this will break up the center, and the center may not hold. And the whole idea, the fragility of India itself in those, balkanization. So now the second question is what you said about what does it mean to be a Bihari? Because this is a question I grapple with as somebody who comes from UP. And this is where this whole complexity of being in the Hindi heartland, no language which distinguishes a UP wala from a Bihari from somebody from Madhya Pradesh. So what is the glue which holds UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh together? If it is not language, what else it is? So this is a big challenge, big question, very complex question. I think a hugely important question, which needs further thinking. I don't have an answer. I think I feel the same, that UP sort of spent its political energies between 1947 till even now it is doing this, upholding the center, being the heartland, playing victim to the idea of being the heartland, which really does just injustice to its own demands as a region. It has failed to develop a regional agenda by supporting all these national and nationalist parties. So this is a problem, I think, which needs both. This demand about what you said about JVP Commission and the DER Commission, they did not really go into specifics. This was just a way of saying that post-47 we have thought about this question, we have not forgotten this demand, this idea of the linguistic principle, but now is not the time. That's what both of them said. Professor Mishra, what you said about the merger, there is no demand for, I'm trying to, okay, can I skip the question? Okay. Dr. Gupta, I think who mooted the idea, I'm not sure, because both, there's a sequence of events is very, things happen very quickly. And both B.C. Roy and Shri Krishna Sinha are together, and they suddenly come with this announcement. Nobody expected this announcement. Obviously, this had a lot to do with, my feeling is that, or I may have read this somewhere, that the person who was behind this was Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the president. And he, of course, that whole generation of people, people like C. Rajgopalachari, Rajendra Prasad, Nehru, were very concerned about linguistic provinces. They felt that this can really imperil the unity. I mean, the person who spoke openly about it was Rajgopalachari. He said that this is a kind of tribalism. Because he was no longer in government, he could openly speak. But I think it could have been Rajendra Prasad, who may have worked with both of them. And of course, this was pointed out that this is very much, this whole idea of balkanization, how to contain this sentiment. And this is one response to containing.
Thank you very much. It made me feel young again because I lived through all this as a teenager, and it's hard to imagine the fear Nehru had of India breaking up. I mean, now we can look back with confidence, 70 years of Indian independence. At that time, they were all worried India would break up all over again. And so he resisted, he failed, and that probably made India more stable than it could have been otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gyanesh, and thank you, Lord Desai. We will now move into the 3 parallel technical sessions. The technical session on river, land and people, the Kosi Trail, will be held in Kautilya Hall, the hall next to us. The next one on inequalities, social justice and protest will be held in Chanakya Hall on the 5th floor. And migration matters in Nalanda Hall on the 5th floor.